Hello Raiders! This is Justin's 52 Books, where I discuss my selections for the 52 Book Club's 2022 Reading Challenge. This is week 18 and I'm talking about Prompt 9, a book that sparks joy. And what a joyous book I have. It's The Glass Harmonica by Barbara Ninde Byfield, and it was written in 1967 and then later released in 1973 as The Book of Weird. I was going to be reading something else for this prompt. I'd found a science fiction novelization by Thomas Dish of The Prisoner, the old television show from the UK. And that allowed me to jump right back into that world of all those questions and all those unresolved things and all those mysteries of that show. And that brought me a lot of joy, but not nearly as much as I got when I was revisiting this book. So I had to change some things around. Any chance I have to bring attention to this book and the Book of the Weird, I want to do because I love them so much and I think they are underrated and underknown. First off, what is it? The Glass Harmonica, a lexicon of the fantastical. Well, what's a lexicon? A lexicon is I had to look it up just to make sure, a person, language, or branch of knowledge, so that we're on the same page. And that's it, an A to Z rundown on all things fantastical from 1967. Which is an interesting time to have kind of a touchstone on fantasy, because it's after old school fantasy, Mervyn Peake, Tolkien, Leiber, Howard, all of them. But it's before Earthsea, it's before Dungeons & Dragons, it's before Discworld, it's before fantasy fiction culture as we know it today, which in its own right, it's cool to have that touchstone. But on top of all that, you have Byfield's art and whimsical sense of humor, and in accordance with the prompt, it's an absolute joy to read. So bear with me as I read some selections, but I really want to point out some things. So under the selection for Burial Alive, when the point of death approaches, it is well to recall that one skeleton will in all likelihood be found years later. Assume therefore a significant and pleasing attitude for your bones to be found in. It is well to control your hunger and let that last spider survive you, for its webs will add much pathos to your remains when you are discovered. That's cute. Moving forward, under the selection Spirits, Demons, and Ghosts, we have the demon here. They are masters of all forms of man and beast, the costumes of all countries and all tongues, yet they have difficulty disguising their cloven hooves. Demons are plagued with fevers, itches, ulcers, boils, blisters, and hoof and mouth disease. And then lastly, on page 149, you have the wizard selection. Look at that wizard, that's awesome. Trust those wizards who are thin and fine drawn. Mighty muscles, ruddy cheeks, and a genial disposition bespeak wizards who, when apprentices were young men, sneaked out to play instead of applying themselves to long days over hot crucibles and long nights poring over scrolls, tomes, tablets, and tracts. In addition to all that, on the cover, my 9-year-old daughter came over while I was reading it, and she asked about that because she saw the sunglasses, and I was like, "Well, you've read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, right?" She goes, "Yeah." "And what's the creature in that?" She goes, "Well, it's a basilisk. And what happens with the basilisk? It sees things. It's like it turns them into stones." Like, okay, so why is he wearing that? She goes, "Oh, so he doesn't turn anyone to stones, right? It's a basilisk." And she thought that was hilarious, and I think that might have been one of the first like kind of grown-up jokes that she got without like being told, and so that was kind of special in and of itself. And then she asked me about this guy, and it's like, well, that's an executioner, and the conversation kind of stopped there. But anyway, in addition to all the topical and top-notch information, there's a bunch of clever little jokes and a lot of inside jokes, including the Glass Harmonica, the title. I don't understand that joke. It's a throwaway on page 31 about, I don't even know what the selection was. Someone enjoys Glass Harmonica. That's it. So I don't know why it's titled that, but it's these weird esoteric jokes. But on top of that, we have Byfield's art, which is exquisite. I'll highlight a couple pages here. On page 12, we have an entry for a modest townhouse that is adapted for at least 3 professions, according to Byfield. And she suggests an alchemist, an apothecary, and an astrologer. On page 40, we have a castle as fine as any David Macaulay ever drew, but maybe not as accurate, but as accurate as you need for a fantasy castle to be. As Byfield points out, it looms over the countryside, whether on a high mountain or on a small raised piece of land. You can also see here where someone has made subtle annotations in my copy of this, or at least the library copy that I have in my hands right now. And there's this ghost on the parapet pointed out. And I'll talk about all that in a minute. I just love how this shadow makes this old woman look so menacing here on page 53 under the entry of crones and hags. And here on page 94 and 95, we have a fantasy landscape that is just exquisitely wonderful. You look at it and stories just grow out of the scenery. Last, on page 144 and 145, we have a witch before and after streamlining. This pic is on the cover, and this is what I was going to use for the household item prompt on the 52 Book Club originally. But like I said earlier, reading the Glass Harmonica has just left me with such joy that I had to switch prompts and highlight it under this prompt. And speaking of joy, it gave me much added joy that the library copy that I have of this right now has little annotations throughout the book. Not so bad that they take away, they only add, and they're a little pencil, and they're very subtle. Good example of that is here, under the devil category right here. This guy is always also on the cover. You have this right here, C.F. Millet, Man with Hoe. I had to look that up. It's just a picture, a famous painting apparently, and it's a guy with a hoe who looks just like that. I'm glad that whoever predated me with this book put that in there. And there's little hints about the jokes throughout the book, and it was a pleasure to read that. Brought me much joy. And yet, speaking of joy, yet another aspect of joy that the book has brought me is how I found out about it. And so bear with me while I talk about this. I spent a better part of my life trying to figure out what the name of a children's book that I loved from my elementary school library was. And finally I got fed up trying to look for it myself, and I went on the subreddit, What's That Book? And I laid it all out, and within 5 minutes I got an answer about it. And it was The Haunted Spy by Barbara Ninde Byfield. And so I tracked a copy of that down and reintroduced that to myself from when I was 6 or 7 to now when I'm 40. And it was a joy to reintroduce myself with that. And it was a joy to go deep on Barbara Byfield and find this thing, because it's nice to connect this thing that brought me joy from when I first started reading to this thing that brings me joy as an adult reader. I can't express enough how pleasurable it was to have that connection. And it's a joy to share all this here with you. Copies of this are starting to get a little scarce. It's hard to find them online with the dust cover intact and all that stuff. And I don't usually care about dust cover, but I think I probably want it for this thing. But all is not lost, because, like I said earlier, this was re-released later on in its life in 1973 as the Book of Weird. Same book, same art, same everything, just re-released with not hardcover and a little bit different name. Seriously, these are wonderful, wonderful books. And they harken back to that 60s and 70s fantasy in the best way possible. The old Dungeons & Dragons Redbox era stuff from the 80s swipes so much stuff from these books. I can't tell you. Anyone from that era should recognize wands, staffs, and rods, because the Dungeons & Dragons guys swipe that directly for their saving throw. Or pastiche, or homage, or whatever you want. If you liked that, you'll love this, and you should check it out. And it has been an absolute pleasure to talk about the Glass Harmonica with you and the Book of Weird. This has been week 18, and I was talking about Prompt 9, a book that sparks joy. For more information on the prompts of the 52 Book Club, you can check them out on their website, the52bookclub.com. You can also check them out on Facebook and Goodreads. You can also check me out on Goodreads and Storygraph at Justin's 52 Books. And I hope to see you next week when I talk about Prompt 22, a book with an unlikely detective. And it's nonfiction. That's something that I have been lacking on so far this year. So it's good to jump into that. Until then, Happy reading.